Let's shift focus right now. It being November the 25th, it marks the first day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. It is an annual international campaign, as I mentioned, kicks off on the 25th of November, with the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it runs for 14 days until the 10th of December. It was started by activists at the inaugural Women's Global Leadership Institute in 1991 and continues to be coordinated each year by the Center for Women's Global Leadership. It is used as an organizing strategy by individuals and organizations around the world to call for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls, as well as men and boys. Now here is Mary Wanjiru, who's ending violence against women specialist at the UN Women Kenya, joining us in studio to help talk about this all-important discussion. So let's plug into this conversation, and asante sana for making time. I expected you to be in orange due to the theme, but that aside, how important is this day, marked annually, time and time again? What exactly does it stand for, and how important is it, not just to the women, to the men as well, because they're part of the problem and part of the solution?
Thanks for having me. Today marks the International Day for Recognition of Elimination of Violence Against Women, which is also the first day of 16 days of activism that brings attention to violence against women, the effects of this and how it can be prevented. The day is important. During the COVID period, we've noticed that there was an increase in violence against women, and even before that, it was even called the shadow pandemic, the pandemic behind the real pandemic. So violence against women is one of the human rights violations that needs to be brought to the attention and eliminated. Okay, that's well noted. Just a point of correction, that particular bite, as I had mentioned earlier, by the representative from the UN, I understand it is ready. Let's just listen to it before we continue with the conversation with Florence Otieno, who's joining us right here in studio.
16 Days of Activism is an international campaign that takes place each year. It commences on 25th of November. And it's on this day that internationally, we celebrate and commemorate the elimination of violence against women. So the 16 days run all the way to 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. And in between, there are other very important days that we keep recognizing. For example, 1st of December, which really commemorates and celebrates around HIV and AIDS. And so it's a very, what you can call a very important period. So for us, 16 days is that time of the year where awareness, where call to action really comes up. It was originated by activists who felt that it was very important to continue and really organize and strategize and really have a movement around individuals, institutions, organizations all over the world to be able to call to action for the prevention and elimination of violence against women. So this year, particularly, we celebrate with a lot of vigor because it has been 30 solid years of commemorating 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. 16 days of activism is very important to Kenya because, one, remember, we are a country that still continues to experience gender-based violence. Women and girls are violated, and they are violated in big numbers. Look at our statistics. From our national statistics, it actually shows that in Kenya, over 40% of women and girls have experienced some sort of violation in their lifetime. So for that reason, then it calls for us to be able to join the world in saying no to violence, in calling for action to prevent violence. And if where violence has been occasioned, to just be able to join together and really protect and respond effectively.
speak about responding effectively. That's Mary Wanjiru, who's a specialist at UN Women Kenya. But in studio, as mentioned earlier, I'm joined by Florence Otieno, the project lawyer at Kriau Kenya. Asante sana for your time. So we've seen the importance of holding this 16 days of activism. It's been quite some time. But as you mentioned, since the outbreak of COVID-19, there's been an upsurge, a spike in the number of violence cases against women in the country. And I don't mean to cast aspersions, but in terms of the impact of this 16 days, irrespective of the 16 days, we've still had cases of violence meted out against women. How exactly are we dealing with it this time round to ensure that we need to stop this, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think violence against women has been there throughout the years. It's not something new. As you know, she's mentioned that it's been 30 years of marking this day. Yeah. The theme this year is to end violence against women now. So it's calling all actors, all stakeholders throughout, from governments, global actors, and to people working in the community to do whatever it takes to, one, prevent the violence against women, and two, to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable for the actions. So the purpose of this 16 days is really to create awareness in all spaces that violence against women is a human rights issue that needs to be addressed immediately.
Okay, and speaking of gender-based violence, without men, we cannot eliminate gender-based violence. They need to feel part of the solution as well, irrespective of being part of the problem. What are we doing this time round to, you know, plug them into the conversation and not look at it as a women-only affair, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, but they're equally involved, being intentional about it, because that's the goal, I believe, right?
Yes, definitely. Men need to be involved, not only in the conversation, but in the actions that are being taken. Are we holding other men accountable for their actions? Are we talking about the social issues? Because men are also recipients of violence. It's not a women's only issue. So this, other than just having, talking and saying it's a women's issue, there needs to be a conversation about how can we prevent it? What discussions are we having at home? What discussions are we having at the bars? What discussions are we having in matatus to end this problem? So it's a conversation that needs both men and women.
Yeah, and definitely we need to change the way society, you know, looks at some of these perpetrators. We shouldn't glorify violence against women. But speaking of inclusivity, and especially in decision-making environments, with the 16 days of activism against GBV, we also need to push the idea that the views of women, girls, are equally quite valid and relevant when it comes to decision-making. How do we ensure we don't silence them, we stop the silence and include them, especially in national decision-making processes? The gender divide bill, we've had that conversation time and time again. It still hasn't been implemented.
Yeah, we have a beautiful constitution that talks about 2/3, and I think the first step is having women in those spaces to begin with. So, and not just one woman then to speak for all. We need to remove all the barriers that prevent women from reaching those spaces. Once we have women in those spaces, then we can have the conversation on how to make these changes in society.
But what barriers are there? Is it construed by society itself? Because on paper, the policies and the law as well seem to be aligned in terms of, you know, gender inclusion and all that. Is it changing the way the society thinks? What needs to be done? Because in Parliament, and I can bear me witness, when gender bills come to the floor of the House, the male MPs are not there. They will give it a wide berth. You get me?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very true. So you asked what barriers there are, and I'll begin by just pointing out that we live in a patriarchal society. So that's the beginning of our problem. So among the many ways you can address it, yes, it's deeply ingrained in society. The same way you wake up and know you have to probably eat to sustain living, the same way we live in a patriarchal society where you know men dominate women. So there needs to be changed right from who you are. Do you question daily? Do you know that women are equal to men? So it starts with personal change, people doing deep reflections, and change as a society. So there are several barriers that prevent women. There's poverty, which affects women disproportionately. There's still the violence, which prevents women, again, from reaching such spaces. You have women running for these seats, then you have different attacks, and it can be cyberbullying. There are different attacks meted on women. So there's still a whole conversation that needs to be had about the barriers.
And speaking of a conversation on barriers, it doesn't seem to be painted as us against them. You know, we shouldn't look at it from a point of view as men that we're being challenged, and that's why we'll try and retreat and try and push it back and ensure it remains a patriarchal society. I think that change of psyche is quite important, but also the theme is in line with breaking the silence. Do you think this security agencies are in line with making sure we stop and stamp out, you know, gender-based violence within communities in Kenya? Because we've had instances where violence has been on national TV, going as much as, you know, cutting off limbs. It shouldn't get to such a point. So in terms of the legal and security avenues, are they streamlined, do you believe?
We are getting there. So it's a discussion that started a while back. We have the polycare that's come into place.
News, yeah.
So we have a lot of changes that are currently happening. The police, with the gender desks, there's a lot of work that's being done around that. We are moving from the position where we would blame victims, so victims wouldn't want to, I mean, survivors would not want to come out, because we would be like, what were you wearing? What was happening? Did you provoke the man? So now we are shifting from the conversation to actually listening to the stories of survivors, validating their experience, and then now pursuing justice. So yes, we do have good laws that may still need review, but currently we do have good laws. We are moving to a point where policies are becoming more inclusive and recognizing the various challenges that women face. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
Well, we need more intentional effort, perhaps. So speaking about the 16 days of activism against GBV, what's different this year, apart from the theme? Perhaps you can start with the theme, yeah?
Yeah, so the theme, as I had earlier said, is ending elimination of violence against women now. So the key word is now.
Yeah.
We are not thinking about what we are going to do in 10 years' time, what we are going to do. It's not a vision, a 2060 kind of thing. It's what can be done now. What can the players who are currently working in the space do now to end the violence? What are the global actors, the people who make policy on a larger scale, doing about violence against women? What is the government doing to end violence against women? What are you and I doing to end violence against women?
Okay.
Yes.
And, well, at times this question is not usually asked, because we have these big statements in terms of the themes and some of the events that will be held to mark this very important day, but we don't ask how. How exactly can I stop violence against women? How exactly can stakeholders, including you, stop violence against women? How do we answer that how question in order to, less talking points and more action? You get me?
Yes, I do. I think you begin to look at the root cause. Why is violence being meted against women? Why are they disproportionately affected by this? So when you begin to ask the questions why, is it because we view women as property? Is it because we view women as lesser beings? Is it because we have been taught that way, that fine, if she doesn't listen to me, then I can beat her? So you need to begin to question, what is the root cause? Where is it coming from?
Okay.
And then you can begin to come to the how. How do we address this? Is it a change of mindset? Do we need more policies in place? Do we need more funding for the women's rights issues? So again, it's coming to what is the root cause and how do we address it?
Well, at the inception, we need to start from there. As we finalize, how do men get more involved in this? Because we've talked about women from the point of starting till now. How are men involved in this 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence now?
Men, there's so many things men can do. For starters, I believe is begin to challenge your own views as a man. What do you believe women equal? And two, again, holding perpetrators accountable. There's been a lot of talk on social media and in just general spaces where we blame victims. We say she was a slave queen, so she deserved what happened to her. But we need to stop shifting the blame from the victim to the perpetrators. We need to hold each other accountable and ensure that these conversations are being held everywhere.
But what if the man is the victim of gender-based violence? Very few talk about this, and we remember what used to happen in Nyeri, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Men can be victims, and again, there's this perception that he needs to be a man, so he's not going to come out. Very few cases are reported. So again, having this conversation where a man, if he's facing violence, can openly come out to you and be like, hi, I am facing violence, what help can I get? So again, we need to make conducive spaces where we can have these open conversations where people can freely come out and discuss these issues without fear or without perception that they'll be perceived in a certain way.
Yeah, we shouldn't look down upon those who've been, affected by gender-based violence in one way or the other, even as we continue with this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Florence Otieno, who's the project lawyer at the Center for Rights Education and Awareness right here in Kenya. The first day of this 16 days, let's see what steps will be taken, even as various people plug in on board to mark the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. We'll definitely have more discussions on that, especially since it's just the first day of these particular 16 days. And definitely stay tuned to KTN News for that and much more. It brings us to the end of today's edition of Morning Express. We leave it on a high note. And remember, you can play a part in stamping out gender-based violence in whatever little way. My name is Jesse Rogers. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.